Welcome to a Civilized discussion. I'm your host, Clinton Herrigstad, and today our guest is Victor Tiffany, co-founder of the Revolt Against Plutocracy and the Godfather of the Bernie or Bust movement. After I get into it a bit with Victor, we'll open the lines for you to call in and ask your questions or anything you might like to add to the conversation. So be formulating your questions as we go on, and when I say we'll be going to the phone shortly, start calling in to get into the queue. The number to call in is 218-28-CIVIL or 218-282-4845. That's 218-28-CIVIL or 218-282-4845. We'll be saying that a bit more later in the show if you missed that, so just enjoy the show and give us a call when you have your question. All right, let's get to the show. All right, and now we are live with our guest, Victor Tiffany, the co-founder of the Revolt Against Plutocracy and the Godfather of the Bernie or Bust movement. How are you doing today?
Great, Clinton. Thanks for having me. I appreciate this.
Yeah, no problem. I was very interested in your line of interest here with the Bernie or Bust movement. I was Bernie or Bust in 2016, and just would like to give you a platform to discuss if what your plans are for the 2020 version of that. And what I'd like to start off with is the question I ask everybody when they first come on the show is, how did you get from where you were to where you are?
I've always been a progressive, not necessarily Democrat, but always had progressive values my entire life. And over the course of 2014, it started to dawn on me, reading the work of Chris Hedges and then the major study by Page and Gillums about democracy in America, the fact that we have a oligarchic system, that it's not a democratic order. And then I had heard a lecture by David Cobb, who was with the field organizer for Move to Amend, and I was with Move to Amend at the time, overturning the Citizens United decision by way of a constitutional amendment. And he asked the audience at one point, this was again 2014, who here is a revolutionary? And I very slowly and reluctantly raised my hand because I wasn't sure. I mean, it seemed strange to even consider myself a revolutionary at that point. But by the end of the year, it had dawned on me, again because of the study by Page and Gillums, that we're not going to get a constitutional amendment. We're not going to get progressive legislation. You're going to get what the ruling elites want, and that's it. And I realized that we do need a revolution in this country. It's not something we want. It's not something, we want a woman in the White House. We want a gay man in the White House. We want an Hispanic American president. But we need a revolution, and needs take precedence over wants. So on New Year's Day 2015, I published Standing on the Edge of the Next American Revolution on the Amendment Gazette, which unfortunately is no longer available online. But that essay essentially became the chapter 1 in our book about the Bernie or Bust strategy that we initiated June 22nd, 2015. As it wasn't even called Bernie or Bust for the first week or two. It was the wins strategy. Right in November, Sanders. We thought that sounded pretty clever, and then we were looking for a Twitter account name, and my co-author Patrick Walker suggested one morning, why don't you try, I just saw this as a comment on Facebook, try Bernie or Bust. And this was either late June 2015 or early July, and I searched for it on Twitter, and it was available, and I said, oh, that's great. That's actually very good. It kind of covers exactly what we're doing. And it wasn't 3 or 4 days after we acquired that Twitter account name that Patrick and I both agreed, let's drop the wins and make this whole thing a Bernie or Bust strategy. And it just took off beyond our wildest imagination. We did everything we wanted to do. We didn't get 1 million pledge takers, but we had enough that we were sending the message to Democrats, not loudly enough. Of course, MSNBC never mentioned the phrase. The first time their mushroom viewers heard the phrase was when Sarah Silverman blurted it out the first night of the DNC, when she said, "You Bernie or Busters are being ridiculous." Of course, by then it was too late. The only consequence of Bernie or Bust at that stage was we're going to vote for the third party candidate. Back then, it was also a write-in option. We dropped the write-in this time because unless Bernie runs as a write-in candidate, he gets pissed off at Tom Perez or the Democratic Party elites. He figures out they're robbing him again, and this time, knowing he's got nothing to lose, he goes ahead and runs as a write-in candidate. There's no reason to write in Bernie Sanders. And again, anything like that would have to be coordinated on a nationwide basis. So the or bust option this time around is voting for a progressive third party, whether it's the Green Party, the Socialist Party, Justice Party, or anything along those lines. But in 2016, it was either write-in Bernie Sanders, which is just something I ran with. We organized for 6 months around that idea. It took off. It was very popular, but it comes closer to cult of personality than it does an actual revolutionary strategy to force this country into a progressive direction. And this time around, just to get to where we are now, the IPCC report had come out in, what was that, 2018? Giving us basically 11, 12 more years to cut carbon emissions in half, or else we're going to cross a threshold and there will be no turning back. We will simply accelerate this climate collapse and be facing not just the decline and collapse of civilization and world order as we know it, but very possibly the entire human race may go extinct, if not by the end of this decade, certainly by the end of this millennium. So Bernie or bust has actually become equal, and we use this pair of hashtags all the time. Bernie or bust equals revolution or extinction. And instead of bandwagoning onto his political revolution this time, we are focused on a green revolution, centered around his proposal for a Green New Deal, the $10 trillion proposed effort to transform the energy sector into a green energy, possibly involving what Republicans hate, which is picking winners and losers, at least in the energy sector. But this isn't something that we really have any choice over if we don't undertake this massive transformation of the energy sector and engage in intense carbon capture out of the atmosphere and either sequester it or reuse it some way, maybe carbon bags instead of plastic bags, carbon container, it depends on what they can come up with in reusing captured carbon. It might have marketplace applications. And then, because we already have positive feedback loops, you can see them in the Amazon. Those fires are because the forest is so dry because of the drier and warmer conditions. So we're in a positive feedback loop. These fires are going to make climate even warmer because it's releasing carbon, which is going to make the forest even drier, which is going to cause more forest fires in the future, which is going to cause more global warming. So we're in a situation of positive feedback loops, and that's just one of a couple dozen that are out there. Melting Arctic ice is another positive feedback loop. If we don't figure out a way to cool the planet off, artificially, if you will, in other words, geoengineering, we can't stop these positive feedback loops. There's no other way to do that. So we need a multi-pronged approach. And what we really need is a progressive in the White House, somebody with a progressive governing philosophy. A neoliberal isn't going to do it. And somebody who's at the beck and call of Wall Street and other transnational corporations aren't going to do what's necessary. A conservative isn't going to engage in the kind of transformative legislative and executive order behavior that's going to be necessary, declaring, for example, a climate emergency. And a libertarian, just forget about it. Gary Johnson last time just said, wow, the sun's going to get big and fry the earth eventually. Of course, that's hundreds of millions of years from now. But so the other three major ideologies active in the United States are just worthless when it comes to what we need to do. So this time around, Bernie or bust absolutely is a fundamental requirement for anything close to preserving the climate as we have today. If we don't elect either Bernie or Tulsi would be equivalent. She is our plan B this time around. We didn't have a plan B last time. If Bernie had dropped out in 2015 or 2016, we would have been dead in the water. There would have been no Bernie or bust. We would have had no option. But this time around, if that happens, Bernie gets ill or has injured or whatever, has to drop out of this race, we seamlessly transition over to Tulsi or trash the Democratic Party. Same idea, leverage. If it isn't this candidate, we're not on board. We're going to be voting progressive on November 3rd, 2020, regardless of what's happening in the Democratic Party. If they run a progressive, we'll vote blue. But if they run another neoliberal, from Biden to Harris to Elizabeth Warren, then we're not on board. We're not going to get behind that kind of candidate. And even if there's a neo-fascist in the White House, because in our view, and this was an argument that we had a hard time convincing people of last time, because they just, for whatever reason, thought Hillary Clinton was better than Donald Trump. And we just don't agree with that. This neoliberal free trade agenda aims to fundamentally transform the United States into a top to bottom corporate order. These agreements are not your grandfather's free trade agreements. Back then, free trade was low tariffs or no tariffs and prohibition against currency manipulation. And as we talk about in our book, Bernie or Bust, Pioneers of Electoral Revolt, these things are corporate crafted transformations of our political order from democratic self-government to corporate self-government. These corporations, or representatives of their transnational corporations, are involved in these secret negotiations. And if we don't get a progressive into the White House and get rid of this neoliberalism, we're going to lose the United States as we know it first, which would have happened if Hillary Clinton had won. But these neoliberals running against Trump are no better. Because you just take, for example, Elizabeth Warren. Who's she going to call in for her foreign policy team? Probably Obama's foreign policy team. The same team that took us from 2 wars to 7 wars. Mm-hmm. So we just don't see her as particularly progressive. She showed her true colors in 2016 when she wouldn't support Bernie Sanders and instead supported the reckless warmonger and uber neoliberal Hillary Clinton. So the candidates themselves did the division between who's progressive and who's neoliberal when they affiliated themselves in 2016 with Hillary Clinton as superdelegates, as campaign coordinators in the case of Kamala Harris. The rest of them were delegates or superdelegates of Hillary Clinton. So they all decided who they side with, and Tulsi Gabbard, of course, sided with the progressive in the race.
She famously dropped or took a step out of the DNC, and that kind of sets her apart in itself, doesn't it?
I just saw a WikiLeaks email from that period of somebody writing her, telling her, this is what, early on after 4 contests, that is the tie in Iowa, the Bernie victory in New Hampshire, the virtual tie in Nevada, and then the Clinton win in South Carolina. That's when Tulsi came on board and supported Bernie, and she got a letter from somebody in the DNC saying, Hillary's going to be the candidate. Mm-hmm. They had this thing rigged from get-go. They knew no one was going to take this nomination away from Hillary Clinton. They had it rigged. The whole thing was a setup, and even Bernie or bust, they didn't care. They would rather have Donald Trump in the White House, and this is still true for a good number of these Democratic Party elites, not the rank and file Democrats. I'm sure they're smart enough to get rid of Donald Trump, and they'd rather have Bernie Sanders over Trump, but not these elites, not these MSNBC types and oligarchs and people who work on Wall Street and so forth. They would rather have Trump because he's closer ideologically to them than is Bernie Sanders.
And it does seem like when we had an Obama presidency, we got a lot of the same stuff that we're getting now as far as wars and things like that, and corporate welfare and that kind of thing. But the people were more complacent to it. At least with Trump, there's scrutiny. The people have their eyes on him with laser targets, and everything he says and does is scrutinized and drugged through the mud. But with someone like Obama, who most everyone thinks is a great guy, nobody's looking for these things, and all this stuff is just happening.
He's trying to usher this Trans-Pacific Partnership in, and you just put your finger, you just hit the nail on the head as to why someone like Trump is not as dangerous as someone like Clinton or even Obama, because liberals just go to sleep and they don't pay that much attention to what these neoliberals are doing. I don't think they understand the pernicious and predatory nature of neoliberalism, and particularly these so-called free trade agreements. And so you're right; they go to sleep when there's a liberal, when there's a Democrat in the White House. Oh, we can rest now. You know, the Republicans out, you know, not in power. And in many ways, as you pointed out, the Democrats are doing things that the Republicans can only dream of.
And Obama himself even, I believe, said that 5 years prior he would have been considered a moderate Republican or something like that.
In the 80s, would have been considered a moderate Republican.
Right,
that is correct.
And so we've gone through a lot of what Bernie or Bust is, but what is the essence of what you would like to get across to the audience of the show today?
First of all, we found out information due to a study that's been published in 2018 by French political economist Thomas Piketty, which makes Bernie or Bust a foregone conclusion. It was last time too. Clinton didn't lose because of Bernie or Bust, although we came 9,000 votes short in Pennsylvania of claiming responsibility for her defeat. She lost because people stayed home. And this is sort of Thomas Piketty's insight. So let me just back up a step. There are 6 categories of voters who will not support the Democratic nominee unless it's Bernie Sanders. All right, so obviously it's the Bernie or Busters. We're 48,000 strong now and hope to be 100,000 by the time the primaries begin next year. There's also the DSA. They passed a Bernie or Bust resolution a few weekends back. Now it's weak T. It only means that they're not going to endorse any other candidate besides Bernie Sanders as a Democrat. It doesn't say they won't vote for him. So it's very weak T, and there's probably maybe 5,000-10,000 at the most of that 58,000 member organization who won't vote for the Democratic Party nominee unless it's Bernie Sanders. That's the smallest collection of 6 categories of voters. So there's them, there's Bernie or Busters. 50%, roughly 50% more of Bernie or Busters are people who are Bernie or Trump. They're swing voters. So that's the third category. There was an essay, winning essay, published in the New York Times back in June by a 17-year-old who will be voting for the first time next year. So now they're 17 and 18. Next year they'll be 18 and 19. First-time voters, and she declared herself to be a member of the Bernie or Bust generation, which I have social science background. I know that doesn't mean 8.8 to 9 million Americans are suddenly Bernie or Bust. Of course, there's some people who aren't paying any attention. There's Republicans and conservatives in that group. But let's just say out of that 8.8 to 9 million people, a mere 5% of them are Bernie or Bust. And unfortunately, she defines that as not voting, staying home, which isn't Bernie or Bust. But how do you reach... I couldn't even find her on Facebook. How do you reach 9 million people and say, no, 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 you want to vote, just not for the Democratic Party nominee, unless it's Bernie Sanders. So anyway, 5% of them would be about 440,000. Now we're getting some serious numbers. Now take all those Bernie or Bust categories and add them up. And you don't get anywhere near the size of 2 other categories of voters who will stay home on November 3rd, 2020, if it's not Bernie Sanders. Poor people and poorly educated people, according to Piketty. They won't come out and vote unless there's a candidate, what he calls social democrat, or what Bernie calls himself, democratic socialist. Those are equivalent terms, because they want the 15. They need the $15 an hour. They need the Medicare for all. They need free education so that they can send their kids to school or get better schooling themselves and pull themselves out of poverty. And if they don't have a candidate like that, they'll just stay home. So those are 6 categories of voters that the Democrats will leave on the floor, won't get as part of their coalition to try to defeat Trump if they nominate someone like Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden. So that's the main thing we want to get across. And the other part is that, you know, we have a pledge. We need people to take that pledge. We get the leverage of, hey, if you're not going to support Bernie, you're going to lose the election, from a lot of people taking that pledge. So that's available at BernieOrBus2020.us, as in United States. You can take the pledge there. And if you really want to get involved, you can, on that same website, you can go to the movement building page and register as a Bernie or Bus activist. We have tactics in place this time that will keep people out of Facebook jail. A lot of burners who were posting about, you know, just Bernie Sanders last time would end up in Facebook jail for a week or 2 weeks. They couldn't post or leave a comment on any group. We have a methodology that will keep people out of Facebook jail and allow them to promote Bernie or Bust. So, and of course we have Twitter tutorials and other tutorials out there. We have this thing far more advanced than we were 4 years ago at this time. So if the Democrats think they can somehow slip in another neoliberal or allow Elizabeth Warren to divide the left, and therefore Bernie won't get the nomination in the first round of voting, and therefore they'll get the neoliberal of their choice, whether it's Harris or Biden or whoever, if they think they're going to get away with that and then defeat Trump, they are out of their gourds, because they will be leaving millions of voters, I say on the floor from, you know, film editing terminology, but they are not going to get support from millions of people, not just the Bernie or Busters, but poor people and poorly educated.
Mm-hmm. And I don't pay a ton of attention to the polls, but I have seen, you know, Joe Biden in the lead. Elizabeth Warren is like in a virtual tie with Bernie Sanders a lot of the time. How do you know only Bernie can beat Trump when the polls say otherwise?
That's a good question. A lot of it has to do with what I just said, right? There are people, they're polling people, but they're not polling people who don't have a phone, who don't have, you know, maybe they have a cell phone, maybe they don't have any phone. And they also are not taking into account the Bernie or Bust organizational PAC. If things work, if things don't go right this time around, we're going to raise money and run ads against the Democratic Party nominee, the neoliberal, in swing states in support of a third-party candidate, a progressive candidate. So they have more coming their way. And of course, we know the flip side is going to be true too. If Bernie does manage to get the nomination, we know some of these fat cat Democratic Party donors are going to be funding Trump's super PAC. So they will have, you know, Bernie will have attacks coming from the right, red baiting up the wazoo. You see it already. I had people refer to him as a communist and so forth. So at least with Bernie, the attacks will be coming from one direction. But if it's someone like someone like Biden or Harris or Warren, they'll be attacked from the right with Republican and conservative super PACs, but they're also going to be getting attacked from the left, from our super PAC. So are we absolutely certain Bernie or Bust is a foregone conclusion? We're very close because of the insights lent to us by Piketty, But you know, the polls at this point only reflect name recognition, according to a very astute observer and predictor of outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
But she doesn't, or these people don't understand the full picture of what's coming. And she points out, once people get beyond name recognition, once they hear Biden and all his gaffes, oh my God, every day. Today, I just saw a video, Biden speaking, I don't know if it was last night or today, but he's talking about the Crimea incident with Russia. And he said, you know, they said that my former boss, he couldn't remember Obama's name talking to an audience. He could not pull up in his memory Barack Obama's name. And this is a guy they think is going to defeat Trump in a one head-to-head debate. They're nuts. People get wind of this, they're going to be dropping Biden like a hot potato.
And the thing that really appeals to me the most probably about the idea of Bernie or bust is that the left really seems to be all over the place when it comes to polls or even in a thread online in a social media platform. You'll see the left is all over the place on who they're supporting. You know, Buttigieg, Harris, Warren, all these different names. Whereas on the right, there is pretty much just one name. It's just Trump. So they have all their ducks in a row. But over here, there's not a lot of organization, it seems. And that's kind of seems what this is to kind of use that leverage, as you say, to kind of get us all organized.
Well, that's an ideal way of putting it. You know, people who are committed to Buttigieg, maybe it's a gay or lesbian American, and they really want Buttigieg to become the nominee. They're not going to like basically the whole concept of we need a revolution. We want a gay man or a gay woman in the White House, but we need a revolution for climate purposes, for campaign finance reform purposes, to disempower the corporations, to overturn Citizens United, all these reasons that we need a revolution. You know, they come into this, you know, fairly shallow, but they really want their candidate, and they're not going to appreciate this movement and this broad analysis of all these categories of voters who won't back Buttigieg, won't back Warren in the general election. And they're, at first they may think, well, they'll get angry. These people are demanding I support Bernie Sanders. And that's why we're shifting out of the more 2016 modality of saying this is a demand and a promise and a strategy. This time we're more, look, this is just part of a much bigger picture. And if you don't see that picture, Trump's going to get reelected. If you don't allow Bernie to assemble his coalition. And by the way, one more point about poor people and poorly educated people. They need to be motivated. They need to be activated. So who has a million volunteer army that can go door to door, find these poor Americans who might not be registered to vote or haven't voted in many election cycles? Bernie does. No one else has the kind of army that he has in place to go out and get these inactive non-voters registered, motivated, excited, and if need be on election day, transported to and from the polling place to make sure that they get out there. Now that is Bernie's political revolution. That's what he's talking about most of the time when he uses that phrase, to activate people who aren't normally engaged. And I'm sure his campaign is aware of Piketty's analysis and 2018 paper that he published.
And I'm sure that there's some people out there that have some concerns or some questions they might like to ask you about this strategy and if it's the right choice for them. And if you'd like to call in and ask him, Victor Tiffany, a question yourself, just call in at 218-28-CIVIL. That's 218-28-CIVIL or 218-282-4845. So if you'd like to give us a call in and ask a question, then you have your opportunity right now to do that. So we'll have the lines open. We'll just continue with this conversation and field any calls that may come in. And I know that with those polls that show, Elizabeth coming ahead, it seems like the establishment does kind of tend to favor Warren over Bernie Sanders. Like, it seems like all the other candidates in the Democratic Party that are in the lead right now are all kind of using Bernie Sanders' old platform from 2016. It's like we're hearing everything he was saying back in 2016 that was radical is pretty mainstream now. And it seems like the establishment really wants to kind of shift us toward that. And it seems like they do a lot in voter suppression and other things like they did in 2016. Are you afraid of the establishment and what they can do to sabotage this movement?
Afraid might not be the right word. I'm deeply concerned. I know they have a lot of power and they can, absolutely sabotage Bernie Sanders. I'm pretty much expecting it. We say Bernie or bust is a foregone conclusion. We think Trump's going to be reelected because we think the Democrats are going to do everything they can to stop Bernie Sanders from essentially taking over the party and turning it back into a progressive party as it used to be under, say, FDR or even Johnson until he ruined his legacy in Vietnam. Sure, I'm very concerned, but I'm not living in fear. We're advancing this this strategy on behalf of Bernie Sanders, certainly not in coordination with him. We have a super PAC, so we just absolutely can't do that and never have. But, unless people really wake up, and it's not going to be easy because we know MSDNC, for example, is never going to have me on the air as you are interviewing me in this podcast. They're never going to have me come on and explain Bernie or bust. Last time the closest they came was Susan Sarandon, and she never mentioned the phrase Bernie or bust. So their viewers are mushrooms, right? They're kept in the dark and fed bullshit. And CNN is not much better. CNN, this is a little story that's in the book. CNN was going to have me on. When we hit 50,000 pledges, the Washington Examiner wrote a story about Revolt Against Plutocracy and the Bernie or Bust pledge. She didn't provide a link to our website, but there was a lot of search engine traffic to the website after that. CNN and Fox News both reached out to us on our Facebook Revolt Against Plutocracy page and made plans to interview me. So I started with Neil Cavuto on his Coast to Coast program. It was only 3.5 minutes. You can't really get into why we considered a Clinton-Trump choice to be the lesser of two fascists, right? Somebody who supports Clinton hears something like that and they just go, God, we can't have this on CNN. This is the Clinton News Network after all. So I was unceremoniously disinvited from coming on Carol Costello's program. That was the original idea, and they just dropped it because they didn't want that kind of analysis. I was able to get on Redacted Tonight VIP with Lee Camp and elaborate on exactly why we saw Clinton and really neoliberals in general as a form of fascism. That essay, Standing on the Edge of the Next American Revolution, made a point that we are drifting into a fascistic order. This was under Barack Obama. This was before Trump came along. He's accelerating that process. There's no question about that. But it was underway with George Bush. It was underway with Barack Obama, who didn't change that much from Bush. And certainly it's accelerated today. We are in a kind of a political crisis here. We're on the threshold of not just climate collapse, which is bad enough, but all kinds of pressures coming at us from the overuse of pesticides, for example. I don't know how many people know about this, but the flying insect population has dwindled from the mid-70s now down to 80% reduction. It has 20% left of flying insects because of industrial scale use of pesticides. So if they're gone, it is on all fronts. You've got the ocean that's getting acidified. That's largely due to climate change, and you've you've got overfish. It just goes on and on and on. There's pollutants. There are microbead plastic in the water, in the air, in the Arctic, in pristine lakes. And we don't know the health consequences of that yet, but we are under assault by industrial civilization. Not in his tactics, not in his approach to dealing with this problem, but in his understanding of the problem. The Unabomber was right. Right? We are destroying ourselves. And the approach he took to combating that assault by modern industrial mindset and transnational corporations, of course, is unacceptable. That's not the peaceful revolutionary strategy, but leverage is a peaceful revolutionary strategy. And that's what our book is about. It's a how-to guide for peaceful revolution within the confines of a two-party system. And if it doesn't work, then you end up with whoever the Republican is. That's the or bust part of it. If it's not Bernie, we will intentionally divide the left, vote progressive. Now all this means is we're going to vote progressive come hell or high water on November 3rd. But that will divide the left enough to have Trump reelected unless, and this is an important caveat, unless there is a recession or a market crash in the interim. That will change the dynamic, which will make you and I eligible to defeat Donald Trump in a general election. That's his one thing, is the strength of the economy. And if that economy loses that strength, whether it's a market crash or an established, multi-quarter decline in GDP, meaning we have a recession, he's done. There's nothing he can do except flat out refuse to leave power and somehow attempt to maintain power by force. He would be done. But otherwise, no, we're pretty certain that Sanders, because, again, these 6 categories of voters, that Bernie has an app for his volunteers to go out and find and motivate and activate. I just don't see that happening for a Warren, and certainly not for Biden. If they nominate Biden, it's over. I just don't see. I just don't see Biden. I don't see Biden winning a debate. If he can't remember Obama's name, how the hell is this guy going to successfully debate Donald Trump, who, for all of his faults, he does have the ability to carry on a debate. He won the nomination, after all. He won the presidency. He's not a complete moron.
He's not exactly a orthodox debater either.
No,
he seems to be pretty much breaking all the rules for everything he's doing.
Pretty much, and some of that's good and some of that's bad. Democrats as of late have been attacking him from the left. How dare he get along with the dictator of North Korea? That's unheard of. He shouldn't be doing that. That's crazy. I don't understand the Democratic attack on Trump from the right. It's just ridiculous. One thing we're losing out on with Trump, and this is a complete tangent, but Trump campaigned to get along with Russia. That was a campaign promise he hasn't kept. He's pulled out of the INF treaty. He's kicked Russians out of the country. He's done all kinds of things to make the relationship between Russia and the United States worse, far worse than it was even when he took office. And that's really a broken campaign promise that is too bad. Trump, for all of his faults and weaknesses and stupidities and his racism and everything, he at least wanted to get along with Russia. He at least wanted better relations and more cooperation between the United States and Russia, and that would have been a good thing. Mm-hmm. And instead, he's just failed on that account. And I think part of it is this pressure, this whole false Russiagate narrative that he was coordinating with Russians to get elected. And of course, that turned out to be complete bullshit. On a serious news network, someone like Rachel Maddow would be gone for all the bullshit she flung about Russiagate.
And yet the elephant in the room of the 2016 primaries, of the DNC primaries, is never really discussed seriously. It's more of a joke, it seems.
Russiagate is a smokescreen,
right,
to hide what you're referencing. There's a lot of problems with the 2016 primaries. It wasn't just the fact that the Clinton campaign paid for, controlled, and essentially owned the DNC. That's bad enough. There's campaign infiltration by either the DNC, which is the same as the Clinton campaign, into Bernie's campaign. In North Carolina, Nico House was the first person to actually start sounding the alarm about this. Wait a second. This person has undermined the Sanders campaign here in North Carolina. She's a plant. And they did that in more states than North Carolina. That came out in the WikiLeaks. In New York, which is because I live in New York, it's one of the situations I'm most aware of and conversant about. The head of the board of directors in Brooklyn, where, what was it, 100,000+ voters mysteriously couldn't vote in the primaries. They were pulled off the rolls. That director in the board of elections was had a house for sale. I'm going to try and make this pretty quick. She had a brownstone for sale in 2012. Couldn't sell it. Was trying to get $1.25 million for it. Couldn't sell it. Took it off the market. In 2014, a realtor came to her, a fixer-upper. They buy properties that are run down at a bargain price. They fix them up, and that's called flipping. She flips properties. She offered this woman, this director, the board of directors, $4.5 million for that brownstone. Sold it to her. And then mysteriously all these votes disappeared. Now, that realtor turns out to be the daughter of a Clinton superdelegate, of a congresswoman in that area. So you have all the makings there of quid pro quo election fraud. Never went before a grand jury, never had any serious investigation. The woman lost her job, and that was it. So, and that's just one of several examples around the country. All the, Arizona, the long lines where people basically gave up and went home. And then California was just a clusterfuck of problems and ballots being thrown out and so forth because they weren't registered in the right party or whatever. And then you had video in Illinois of people on these electronic voting machines. They would push the space for Bernie Sanders, and the number or the area for Hillary Clinton would light up, right? So the thing was programmed wrong. And then you had exit polling all across the country in various counties that was so far off, the State Department viewing these election out polls. What am I trying to say? What kind of polling are those? Where they poll voters after they vote. Those were so far off, the State Department would consider a country doing with that kind of numbers to be an illegitimate election. And yet we had that in county after county after county around the country. Now, We don't know exactly how that happened, how they did that. And in our book, Burn Your Bus, we do talk about several opportunities for corrupt Clintocrats to either rig the software on the machine, to gerrymander the machine, to capture the data from the polling place to the county, centralized county computers where they tabulate all the results, or just hacking that centralized computer. There's something called fractional voting, where they actually can apply the software and this manipulation of the election results, so that if they want to, they basically frame the outcome that they want, and then that always ends up with some fraction of a vote. Like Hillary got 39,784.5 votes, and someone else got 17,1630.7 votes. Well, there is no 0.5 votes. These have to be whole numbers. So they just truncate the decimal point, and they got the results that they wanted. And we believe that's partly what happened in 2016. And I don't know if there's any improvements on that. Of course, this whole business with Mitch McConnell being called Moscow Mitch, he doesn't want to pass a bill that would pay for paper, hand-countable paper ballots, which, as we call for in our What's Next chapter, that's job number one. If we don't have legitimate elections in this country, we don't have a democratic order at all. Nothing even resembling a democratic order. So hand-countable paper ballots is one thing that needs to be done. And then we're in desperate need of campaign finance reform also. So Burn Your Bus, Pioneers of an Electoral Revolt is in part a manifesto for democratic order. It's also a memoir. It's also a how-to guide for peaceful revolution. We came to distrust the corporate media, so we list reliable media for revolutionaries. We have an awful lot in this book, including exercises that voters can take to evaluate candidates based upon the 14 characteristics of fascism. That's actually available on our website, burnyourbus.info, I-N-F-O. There's, if you listen to the second video, I point to where that section of the book is transferred to that website. It's one of the pages on that website. And also evaluate candidates on the 14 characteristics of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is the ruling philosophy, and very, very few Americans understand what neoliberalism is. It's not the capitalism of the 1930s or even the 1940s or 50s. It's an ultra right-wing form of predatory capitalism that is transforming the United States into an order where our value as citizens is made up by what we can buy, how much we can consume, right? Everything's about the market. If you need food stamps, all right, this has to be based on a market process. Right now, the state's still handling it, but they want the privatization of all these public services. That's a major feature of neoliberalism. They want the corporatization of as much as possible. And some of this has been going on for over 100 years. Where did the diamond engagement ring come from?
Right, the De Beers.
De Beers decided, hey, we can turn love into a profitable market. And they turned diamond engagement ring from, you want this for your fiance to you have to have one of these or she won't say yes. So there's been this corporatization of everything, including love, going on for a long time. But it's just accelerated, and basically it's decimating the earth. There's research indicating that the whole idea of growth, economic growth on a finite planet is overwhelming the planet's capacity to even keep up with our consumption habits. So if we don't drown ourselves in garbage, we'll just run, exhaust the planet's carrying capacity, essentially.
And
And that's my optimistic view.
yeah, well, tell us what you really think. Yeah, it does seem like the commodification of everything is what you get in late stage capitalism, from, like you say, love up to prisoners, to include detainees of immigration that we see now are also in for-profit prisons, being commodified as human profit creators.
Right. That's right. Yeah, as much as they can turn into a profit. Charter schools is another good example. And of course, that was under Obama. Let's not forget that. We were in a process of very dangerous, slow transition, have been for quite a while, away from anything resembling a democratic order into something resembling more and more of a fascistic order. Again, if you look at the section on our website that comes out of the book, an excerpt from the book about the evaluating the candidates on the 14 characteristics of fascism, spoiler alert, Bernie Sanders makes an absolutely horrible fascist. He's an utter failure. I think he gets a half a point out of those 14 characteristics. Hillary Clinton came very close to Donald Trump. Right? She had a passing grade at fascism. And Trump, of course, had a better grade, and he's gotten a better grade since he became president. Because in some of these characteristics, we had to leave a question mark, because he had no record of certain things. And now he's filled in that record, and his grade has gone up, particularly since he had Julian Assange arrested and now indicted on a multiple count indictment. That really leans toward fascism and increases his grade on fascism. And by the way, I just have to say this, Andrew Yang thinks Julian Assange should be tried in the United States. So that's not a sign of a progressive candidate. Mm-hmm. For what he brings to the table, I don't see him as much better than any of the other neoliberals. And if I can just address the other outsider out there, Marilyn Williamson, she's probably a revolutionary too. She's not speaking the language of revolution, but she's certainly an outsider. She certainly has radically different approach toward governing. But with someone like that, the risk is the same problem you have with Donald Trump. Part of the reason he's so incompetent is because he has no idea what he's doing. He's never been in government at all. And there's a danger to that, particularly at the level of the White House, where, you're leader of the so-called free world, you have all this responsibility, and you get somebody in there who's never even been on city council before, and all of a sudden there's so much to be done, and these outsiders simply don't have the knowledge to run government competently. It's not an ideological question. It's just a question of experience, and that's what makes Bernie Sanders really the second most qualified candidate of all of them. Of course, Biden's the most qualified in terms of his experience in government, but he's also sunsetting rapidly. When you can't remember Barack Obama's name, this is not someone you want to put up against Donald Trump. So we're in a tricky, dangerous situation here. And I really, truly mean it when we say burn your bus means or equals revolution or extinction. I hate to repeat myself on that, but it's an important thing to get across, that there's so many factors coming into play. We really need a revolutionary in the White House. We need a progressive who's going to govern like a progressive. We don't need privatization. We don't need these pro-corporate so-called free trade agreements. We don't need big money in politics. We need a progressive form of government again. And so Bernie or Bust really represents, it was considered to be a white privilege last time, even though a lot of busters were African Americans. We had, on the Bernie or Bust rally, we had Tim Black, we had Nico House, we had Yana Indigo, and Nelson, what was his name? The guy who wrote the Burn Your Bus song and performed. Actually, there were two of them. Both of them were black Americans. So it wasn't a privileged position. It was a desperate position. These are poor people who really can't afford another neoliberal in the White House, and so they were Bernie or bust. And that happened a lot. In our understanding this time around is you support Warren, that really reflects your class privilege, and it is wealthier and better educated Americans who are supporting Warren rather than Bernie. This class struggle becomes very clear when you look at who's supporting those two candidates. If you're backing Warren, you're showing your class privilege. You're showing your class standard, if you will.
And it really seems like out of all of the candidates, the most progressive are Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard, and Elizabeth Warren. She kind of makes her way up into the top three, at least, out of the most progressive, it seems. And I guess my question would be, why Bernie Sanders over Tulsi Gabbard and Elizabeth Warren? Why do you think he is the way to go?
Well, speaking as an individual, I like Tulsi Gabbard the most, but I'm not an individual. Revolt Against Plutocracy and the whole Bernie or bust strategy involved a subscription list of 47,000 people who are still on our newsletter left over from 2016. So we said for a long time, they are the ones who are going to decide whether we're going to do Tulsi or trash the Democratic Party, Bernie or bust the Democratic Party, Andrew or screw the Democratic Party, Brown, I can't remember his first name. He was thinking about running for a while. And they voted about 7 out of 10 to do Bernie or bust again. So, and that makes sense from a practical viewpoint in that who has experience running for president? Not Elizabeth Warren, not Tulsi Gabbard, Bernie Sanders. Who has an army lined up helping him? Bernie Sanders. Who has the best shot of actually winning the nomination from the left? Bernie Sanders. Because of all these name recognition factors and so forth. Now, why not Elizabeth Warren? Again, that came down to a vote. But now I'm going to speak personally because while I really did like Tulsi Warren as an insurgent candidate, I don't like Elizabeth Warren at all. She's waffling now on Medicare for all. Her foreign policy team will probably be the Democratic Party establishment, which means more wars, more assaults on the Constitution, more. She has spoken out against these free trade agreements. She did write an op-ed in the Washington Post about the investor-state dispute settlement chapter in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I mean, this thing should never, ever have gotten passed in the first place. It is a way for corporations to overrule our representatives in government, this investor-state dispute settlement. I've described it as, instead of a criminal protection racket, it's a corporate protection racket. Because they're protecting corporate profits, whether they're earned or not. They can just go to these courts, these tribunals, and if they win, then we, because when the government has to pay, it's we are losing that case, and corporations get their profits whether they earned it or not. So she's better on that, but she's just weak, and I'm convinced because she sided with Clinton last time. And she says, I'm not a threat to the Democratic Party establishment. She's buddying up to the establishment, which is why you see her discussed favorably on MSDNC and favorably on CNN. You don't see them talking about Bernie Sanders favorably very often. It's because Warren's part of the establishment. She's made it that very clear to the establishment. She's not in this to help advance the revolution. She's counter-revolutionary. Even though Bernie and her have a friendship and he's not going to be attacking her, we're under no such limitations. We see her as a threat to the revolution. She's in this thing to divide the left, and it's working because people, I don't know, maybe they think Bernie's too old or whatever. I'm not sure why. Maybe they think having a woman in the White House is more important than having a revolution. I don't know why supposed progressives are backing Warren, according to the polls, but they are, and it's really sad that they don't see what she did last time, stabbing Bernie in the back the way she did, and affiliating herself with Hillary Clinton as a superdelegate.
And I know there are a lot of sound bites out there and clips and moments in the debate where Elizabeth Warren has in her career and in public said some great things and some really progressive things, but it does seem like you say that there's been too many instances where she's been very flexible in favor of the establishment and even angling maybe to be Clinton's vice, or how she definitely went with Clinton over Sanders in 2016, and Tulsi Gabbard, like you say, she is a great person, but she is trailing a bit on the polls. So
she's not even included in the debates now.
Right.
She doesn't. She's got at 2% in a whole wide range of polls, but not the handful of polls that the DNC are looking at. So they're basically pushing her out, probably for attacking Harris last time. I think Tulsi's supporters ought to just generate this petition telling the DNC, a petition to Tom Perez, if Tulsi Gabbard is not part of this primary debate process, you've lost us. It's only 2%, but 2% is a lot when you're in a national campaign. 2% cost Hillary Clinton, less than 2% cost Hillary Clinton the White House. So when you're in a fairly tight race, and assuming the economy doesn't collapse, this is probably going to be very, very tough to unseat Donald Trump. You can't afford to lose 2%. So I think the Tulsi folks ought to just go on strike. Not necessarily Tulsi or trash or Tulsi or bust, but just let, just generate a petition to let Tom Perez know that if she's not part of the debates, we're not part of the Democratic Party.
And I gotta say,
a version of Tulsi or trash.
My personal preference would be to have Sanders as the president, Tulsi as the vice, and just have 16 years of that.
Right.
But
I like Tulsi at state, the Secretary of State. I think she'd make a great Secretary of State. I think that's a good practice for her to replace Senator Sanders after his second term. I think she could run. Having that experience under her belt, I think she could run a strong campaign, and she'll be a lot more experienced, important experience within the administration. So for vice, Bernie's going to have to negotiate here going into the DNC with whoever comes in second toward the left. I'm not sure if he can trust Warren on this, but he may have to. Who is Bernie's vice president is going to have to be the consequence of negotiation going into the DNC, possibly with Warren, right? Maybe he can talk her into telling her delegates to vote for Bernie on the first round so that he does win the nomination in exchange for her being the vice president. That might be something that, we would certainly support a Sanders-Warren ticket. As long as he was at the top of the ticket, we could live with that.
And I do have a call on the line right now. I have Bennett from Hudson Valley. I'm going to bring him on the line to ask you a question about Elizabeth, or to speak about Elizabeth Warren.
I appreciate you taking my call. I had a little trouble getting through at first because the number you have posted online is 228-282, and that's not it. It's 218.
Right. Sorry about that. Yes.
So anyway, that might. Yeah.
218.
That kind of stuff happens.
28.
Well,
civil. Yep.
Yep. Okay. Look, Elizabeth Warren scares the hell out of me too. I feel much the way you do, Victor, about her. I'm an ardent Bernie supporter. I have been for decades, actually, long before he even ran for president last time around. And Elizabeth Warren, to me, is pretty much all that stands between Sanders' presidency. And that's the biggest obstacle. And why, you were a little puzzled as to why she has this support. I think that for one thing that might be edifying, and vis-a-vis this subject, is a read of Thomas Frank's book, Listen Liberal. Are you familiar with the book?
I've heard it recommended a few times, and I do want to get my hands on that.
Yeah, very important book. It explains what the new Democratic Party is and who its supporters are. And it's more and more a limousine liberal crowd. It's the elites. And Elizabeth Warren spent most of her life on an elite campus, just like Obama did, just like the Clintons did. This is the new face of the Democratic Party. It's no longer Joe the plumber, okay? And that accounts for a big part of it. The other part of it, I think we all recognize, is this fervor to have the first woman president. How that is more significant historically and more important ecologically and in every other way than the revolution, as you said, is baffling. But nonetheless, you can sort of understand the emotionality behind it for people who aren't immersed every day in this kind of thing as deeply as we are. But anyway, my way of combating it, my way of fighting against Warren is simply to explain to people, look, I pretend that I like her. I once did. I traveled from New York into Massachusetts to work for her when she was running against Scott. I did some canvassing for her up there. I don't regret it. I'm not happy with her now. But at any rate, the point is I tell people that. I say, look, I like her. I don't like her anymore. To be honest with you, I'm angry at her. But I don't say that to her supporters, because I did once like her, and I want to be strategic. To be honest with you, I want to be something that Bernie isn't in this regard, and that's at least partly full of shit. So I say, yeah, I like Warren. She's good. I hope she runs as vice president. I say, but look, she has 7 years in government. Bernie has 40. She spent her whole life on campus. Bernie has spent his whole life fighting for social justice, from the streets of Chicago to the halls of the Senate and everywhere in between. Come on, who's on our side? And that's the tact I take. Sorry for rambling on like this, by the way.
Well, no, I appreciate the call. That's some good information. I'll definitely put that book in the show notes. It's Listen Liberal, you said?
Right.
Oh, yeah, Thomas, Listen Liberal. It explains the new makeup of the Democratic Party, who their constituents are. They like these technocrats, these people who are accomplished in industry, accomplished in academia. That wasn't their initial appeal. The old FDR appeal, was, the working class guy, the party of the people, the party of the union guy. That's long over. That began dying in the 70s, and the nail in the coffin was the whole DLC with the Clinton election and the whole takeover by the party of its right wing, which is obvious to all of us now. But anyway, that's, I think, explains a big. The thing that scares me about Warren is that her cozying up to the establishment has worked to the extent that even my area, I'm in the Hudson Valley in New York, a lot of the local committees, the Democratic committees, the little town committees, are supporting Warren, and that. It really deeply upsets me, but I still go on. I'm fighting the fight. I'm working my ass off for Bernie, and I'll continue to do so right to the last drop in me, because I really do see this not just as an election, but as a revolution. And right on, comrades. Let's keep fighting.
Right on.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that.
Okay. Good job.
Well, thank
guys.
you very much, Bennett, for the call, and we appreciate it.
Okay, I appreciate you being there.
Thank you. And let's see here. And do you have other voter pledge recruitment tactics, just to get back to that?
We do. I don't want to go into too much detail, however. People who want to help promote the Bernie or Bust pledge can reach out to us on the Revolt Against Plutocracy page, not the group, the page. You can message us there, and we can get you set up to on our special I platform. I have to be careful how I say this, because I think if certain people got wind of this, we would lose this tactic that we have in place. I'll give you an idea. Used to be when you clicked on Facebook, when you clicked on groups, you would go to another page and it would be a long list of, depending on how many groups you had, a long list of your groups. I still am a member of probably 400 groups, progressive groups, Bernie groups, revolutionary groups, Move to Amend groups still. And I had saved those in an email. And recently, in the last few months, now when you click on the groups link on Facebook, it takes you to groups you can join if you want. But your groups are long gone. You don't have access to your groups anymore. Well, we still do have access to hundreds of groups that we can reach out to. I don't want to get into, again, too much detail, but we can promote the Burn Your Bus pledge on hundreds of groups with no risk whatsoever of ending up in Facebook jail.
Okay, that sounds good. And yeah, we'll definitely have links to that in the show notes as well. And what do you wish you would have known when you first started out on this whole journey that you're on?
I'm not sure I would have wanted to know the extent to which Clinton campaign owned and rigged the thing last time, because it might have discouraged me. So what do I wish I knew? I guess I wish I knew last time what we know this time because of Piketty's analysis and paper telling us about the voting behavior of poor and poorly educated voters or citizens, because that really strengthens the case for someone like Bernie Sanders, a social democrat or a democratic socialist. And part of the problem he's going to have, this isn't an answer to your question, but it just stems from that analysis. If Bernie called himself a social democrat, it wouldn't be nearly the problems he's going to face if he wins the nomination, or even trying to win the nomination, that he's going to face because he calls himself a socialist. I mean, in a way, that's good. We need something besides capitalism in this country. That's another point about Warren, by the way. When Donald Trump stood there in the State of the Union and said the United States will never become a socialist country, of course, a lot of right-wing Democrats stood up and applauded that line, including Elizabeth Warren. So I'm with the caller. I just don't trust her anymore. But I wish I knew that last time that poor people weren't going to support somebody like Bernie Sanders, because it would have strengthened our argument. And this time we're making that argument. We have a bumper sticker, burnyourbus.info, and of course that's a URL, and it points to the website where we have the book for sale, and we have interviews that I've taken or given, and a number of other things. The excerpt from the book on the 14 characteristics of fascism, and links to get the bumper sticker. So what we've done to make maximum use of that bumper sticker and that website is to precede, hey, this is a good book, it's highly acclaimed, you want to get this book, you want to share this book. We precede all that with this analysis of the six categories of voters who will not support an Elizabeth Warren, a Joe Biden, a Kamala. They're only going to come out for someone like a socialist or a democratic socialist. So in that regard, it's helpful, but it's going to be a tough fight right to the very end, because this has never been a socialist country, and the idea of electing a socialist is a long overdue revolution. And I'm not a die-in-the-wool socialist. I'm a fellow traveler with Democratic Socialists of America, have been since they established themselves in 1982 when I was in grad school. But I don't believe the state should have a monopoly on the means of production. I think socialism is being redefined because of the failures of Soviet socialism and the whole Eastern Bloc and Cuba and North Korea. These are such failing economies that I think Marxists these days are looking more at economic democracy. And Bernie has some ideas along these lines of strengthening the unions and so forth. He just came out with a series of proposals to strengthen the labor union, eliminate, what are they called, zones, right to work laws and right to work zones, just eliminate them so that unions themselves would be strengthened. But he's not a Marxist. And I actually had a interviewer claim that this would be a slippery slope into, what, I don't know, Marxism, I guess, or communism, or, state total control of our lives. There's a difference between freedom of individuals and freedom of corporations. This system was designed to maximize liberty of individuals. It was never supposed to maximize liberty of corporations. Those were supposed to have been regulated from the very beginning, but the corporations, through the Supreme Court, have been for well over 100 years gaining more and more influence and I want to say power, but it stems from court allowed, court granted constitutional rights. Beginning with the 14th Amendment, they were granted, the first rights they were granted was due process and equality before the law, the 14th Amendment rights. And then that was in the late 19th century, and ever since then they've been getting more and more and more rights. Of course, with Citizens United, they now have the right to participate in our elections. Our general elections, corporations can influence voters. It was a nail in the coffin of democratic order. Maybe the last nail. I don't even think it was the first nail, because it goes back to Buckley v. Vallejo, a decision that allowed candidates to spend as much of their own money to get elected as they wanted to. And then, again, part of the process in 2014, as I became a revolutionary, was McCutcheon v. FEC decision that allowed people to give as much money as they want. If the framers had wanted the spending or giving of money to be protected as a right in the Constitution, they would have said so. That's just not in the Constitution. That's strictly coming from completely illegitimate Supreme Court decisions going all the way back to when they first granted corporations the rights. It's because corporate influenced or corporate preferring, corporate leaning judges end up on the Supreme Court, and then they end up making these decisions that I think would cause many of the framers to just roll over their grave because of the utter corruption of democratic order, the utter corruption of the meaning of rights. To hand that over to a for-profit corporation just doesn't make any sense. This is a completely illegitimate process, decision-making on imparting of rights by the Supreme Court. It never, ever had any legitimacy. There are no corporate rights granted in the Constitution. That's only come from 5 people on the Supreme Court. Every one of these horrible decisions are 5 people on the Supreme Court granting corporations more and more rights. And just one more point about the trade agreements. There's intellectual property rights being granted to these corporations through these trade agreements. So they're circumventing the Supreme Court with these trade agreements now. They're granting corporations rights that aren't even going before a court to get them these rights. It's the whole thing, the whole free trade, neoliberal free trade regime is a threat to everything we hold dear. And I just want to make a point about something the caller had said about how the Democrats started changing in the 70s. As I was researching neoliberalism to write this book, I thought neoliberalism within the Democratic Party began with Bill Clinton. It didn't. It began with Jimmy Carter. So the caller had that date, the time frame, absolutely spot on when he talked about it began this elitism within the Democratic Party began in the 1970s. That was under Carter, who deregulated. That's another neoliberal agenda item. Deregulated the airline industry.
And something that kind of struck me when you were talking about, how the Unabomber had this in his manifesto, all this same kind of stuff that a lot of regular people are complaining about. It seems to me like, and I heard just the other day on the Joe Rogan podcast where he was talking to Dan Crenshaw about how it doesn't seem like, he had Bernie Sanders on the show, he had Tulsi Gabbard on the show, so he's had a lot of these people on the show, and Andrew Yang, and it seems like nobody seems to have an answer to these mass shootings that have been happening. But it kind of seems to me like as we've gone further and further into late stage capitalism and all of the things that are side effects of that, like the lower quality of life for the majority of people, I think maybe these things are what's triggering these outbursts. I mean, this is just coming from some speculation and my own insights, but it does seem like if we had someone like Bernie Sanders as the leader of our country, then a lot of these things would end up being fixed, and things like poverty, homelessness, addiction, crime, the list goes on and on. All of these things would almost begin to resolve themselves to include these mass shootings.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree 100% with that. He's not Superman, and anything he does most everything he does would have to go through Congress, and unless he's got some amazing coattails in this election, which is possible, to have a progressive Congress helping enact his agenda, things aren't going to move very quickly, at least until the 2022 elections, when hopefully he can get out there and get more progressives elected to Congress. But to your point, addiction is with this opioid crisis. It's really kind of this part of the neoliberalism, and just by the fact that these pharmaceutical companies created these things and they push them like fucking candy out there, and so it's not just the doctors who prescribe these things and the intermediaries who sold the doctors these massive large amounts of pills. It's also the suppliers, because they downplayed the addictive qualities of these things. And addiction's tough. It's not going to be easy to suddenly get off. If you're addicted to a drug like opioids, it's not easy to get off. A lot of them become heroin addicts because the pills are taken away from them, and they're I forget the word I want. They're itching for some sort of new high.
Right.
So they switch over to heroin just to satisfy their craving. And then as far as gun violence, I think there's a wide range of psychological issues. That guy in Las Vegas wasn't hurting. He was a multimillionaire who shot up the music festival. So I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I think they do need to stop selling these assault rifles. These are these military grade semi-automatic assault rifles and these large magazines. I think there's an awful lot of gun safety laws that could be applied. Whether the Supreme Court allows that or not is another question. But there's that can be done, but there's just, at this point, we've almost created a culture of mass murder, and it's going to take more than one election and a turnaround of the economy from a neoliberal late stage capitalism into a democratic socialist order. It's going to take more than that.
I agree with you on that.
I don't think there is any magic bullet on these mass
Well, and that kind of speaks to the complexity of the issue. But I do agree that Bernie Sanders isn't Superman. He's not going to come in and overnight change things. But I think that Bernie Sanders election, or someone of his progressive values being in the White House instead of someone like Trump, would definitely be a step in the right direction. And once he was the president, then he would have that name recognition. He would have that airtime to speak about things. And somebody that I look into some of his information, Johan Hari. Not sure if you're familiar with him. I'll put it in the show notes, but he speaks of addiction too, and the Rat Park experiment that kind of illustrates just how there is a connection between meaning and purpose and fulfillment and addiction, and that people who are fulfilled and have meaning and purpose in life are much less susceptible to addiction, and that it's not necessarily just trying something and then you're addicted. But I mean, that's a whole nother topic. But I do think that if we address the situation of destroying the environment, exploiting workers, and siphoning all the wealth to the top, because in the 50s golden era of America, there was a 1-to-20 ratio of median employee to or CEO to median employee wage salary, and now it's somewhere in the 1 to several hundreds is a typical ratio. And so when all of the innovation and advancements in technology, and therefore production value increasing, get siphoned to the top, that's what we end up with today, basically. And the frustration and all the cognitive dissonance there may be what's driving people crazy. Is just a theory I'm working on right now. But I do think that the stuff that you're doing is an excellent way to kind of try to fight back at all of this, and I really commend you and your efforts and appreciate everything that you do. We're going to wrap it up here because it is getting close to our time here. I just wanted to ask you just one other quick question about where people can find your book. I'm going to throw it in the show notes, and any other URLs, anything else you would like to plug that I will. You just say it now, and I'll throw it in the show notes as well.
Sure. Well, BernieRBus.info, INFO, takes people to the website where they can really get to everywhere else. If they want to take the Bernie or Bust pledge, which the more people who do that, the more leverage we have, the more we make it clear to Democrats, hey, you're going to lose if you don't nominate Bernie Sanders. That's just the message that this whole strategy conveys. And then we want people to not just get this book, we want people to share this book. You know somebody who supports Bernie or Joe Biden, get this book and hand it to them, because Biden still supports the TPP. He said so in the last debate. And then from there, you can get a bumper sticker, you can get the book, you can go to the other website, the original Bernie or Bust voter pledge website, and take that pledge. That would be appreciated. And then you can, even while you're there, there's a movement building page and a form you can fill out there if you want to help promote Bernie or Bust pledge. One person, I saw one comment on a HuffPo article, and Huffington Post doesn't even allow comments this time around, but last time, one comment drove the traffic, 1,000 viewers to our website. And mathematically, statistically, that amounted to about 500 people taking the Bernie or Bust pledge last time. That's just one well-placed comment with a hot link to our website. So there's a lot of things you can do to plug in. We have what we call turnkey revolution, right? It's just, you don't have to figure anything out yourself. We have this all figured out. And in this sense, it makes Bernie or Bust 2.0 a lot easier. I'm sleeping more than I was last time. I was sleeping 5 hours a night because there was always so much that needed to be done until I got the first draft of the book completed. But this time, it's just, I don't know, there's a sensation of been here, done that, and I'm a lot more comfortable with it. And I just hope that more people do plug into this strategy, do say, look, if you want to win, if you want to defeat Trump, you're not going to do it. You're not going to get our help unless this is a revolution. So someone in Third Way said that Bernie Sanders is an existential threat to the Democratic Party. He's an existential threat to neoliberalism. All right, these people are scumbags, and they need to be pushed out of the party. If they want to operate like neoliberals, they can join the Republican Party, take over the Republican Party, and turn that into a capitalist party rather than a fascist party. Kick Trump out and take over the Republican Party. Bernie and the Democratic Socialists and progressives have to take over the Democratic Party. Or else the Democratic Party is going to be escorted to the trash heap of history and sit there alongside the Whig Party. That's Bernie or bust in a sort of conclusive nutshell.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show with us, and it's been very enlightening for me. I believe, 2020 is going to be a Bernie or bust year for me as well. I believe I'll be doing that pledge myself. And just want to thank you again, and thank you, Bennett, for calling in to the show. And it was a really great show and I hope everyone enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it. Appreciate the invitation to come and speak, Clinton.
Thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone.